Okay, perfect. Okay, it's recording. Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining our second virtual transition fair. This year, Boise and West Ada school districts, along with our community partners across the Treasure Valley, have teamed up to bring you this regional virtual transition fair. We greatly appreciate your attendance and hope that you benefit from the information we provide today. My name is Lisa Ramey Hernandez, and I'm a special education consulting teacher at the Boise School District. And this is Jessica Edmunds. And before I and this is our presentation on the Idaho Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Adult Services. And before I introduce Jessica, which I just did, I would like you guys to know we will record this presentation for future reference. We will be disabling the chat feature to ensure students and families' right to privacy. If there is time at the end of the presentation, after we stop the recording, we will enable the chat to allow participants to ask questions. If we do not have the time for your questions, please directly contact the presenter via email or phone. Their contact information will be provided. And here you go. Thank you, Jessica. Please welcome Jessica Edmunds as she does her presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa said, I am Jessica Edmunds, and I am an area transition counselor with the Idaho Division of Voc Rehab. I oversee programs throughout the Treasure Valley, so Boise, West Ada, Nampa. And today we're going to be talking about adult services. So a little bit about what Voc Rehab is. So we're an agency that assists individuals with disabilities with preparing for and gaining work. We do it through two avenues. So we do our adult side, which I'm going to talk about, as well as our youth side, which we call pre-employment transition services. If you guys are interested in learning more about pre-employment transition services, there are two presentations. One of them just finished, but there should be another one talking about our youth services. What VR is not. So we're not a job bank. A lot of people come to us and they assume that we just have a stockpile of jobs ready to go for students or adults. And it's really not the case because everything we do is really individualized. Additionally, we're not a scholarship fund. So we often have students who come to us just because they heard we pay for college, which is absolutely true. But just know that those are all individualized services. We look at people's goals. And kind of determine with them if it's appropriate for their specific case. We're also not an emergency service fund, so sometimes we do pay for things, but our process, like most government processes, can be very slow. So sometimes people come to us expecting a really quick turnaround, and that's really not the case with our services. And then additionally, we're not medical insurance. So though we can pay for counseling, we can pay for medication, we can do a lot of different things through our adult program. We don't replace medical insurance or Medicaid. So another program that we kind of get confused with is Social Security. So for VR, we assist people who feel like they can work, they feel capable and ready. Whereas with Social Security, there's the assumption that you cannot work, or there's major barriers to working. VR is very time limited services, whereas Social Security is something that's very long-term. And Social Security also is financial assistance for daily living, whereas we're just services to assist along the way. So if your goal is to get onto Social Security, we cannot help with that process, but we can help talk you through with that process. So I'm going to briefly touch on our pre-employment transition services. So it's kind of a wordy term, but it's really just our services that we provide to youth to help them prepare for work. And it's really explorative services. To be eligible for those, students just have to be 14 to 21. They have to be enrolled in school, whether that's college, whether that's high school, whether it's a trade program, GED prep. Really anything. And then they just have to have some kind of disability that can be identified through an IEP or a 504, or if they don't have that diagnosis or those records yet, or maybe they have something where they don't need those accommodations, we can still look at that and make them eligible for our youth program. And through that, we do work-based learning, job exploration counseling, counseling on enrollment opportunities, workplace readiness training, and instructions in self-advocacy. And again, our other VR presentation goes into far more details about what those services are. But I will be talking about our traditional and our adult services. So when VR adult services are appropriate is if someone wants to work, they have a disability that makes it hard to continue to work, they want to become employed to the best of their abilities, they require specific services to become employed, and they're willing to follow through. That's pretty much all you need. When it's not appropriate is if students don't want to work, if their parents are just saying, hey, you need a job. With our adult program, it really requires a lot more commitment from students. So really having that motivation and wanting to do it, because our services are also completely voluntary. The other thing would be maybe you don't have a disability, or maybe it doesn't cause any barriers. So sometimes people have a diagnosis of diabetes and it's really well managed and doesn't cause any barriers. So even though they technically do have a disability, it might not be appropriate to open an adult case. And then the other time when it wouldn't be appropriate is if you just want VR to help with applying to SSI or SSDI. So with the traditional adult services, it's a little bit of a process. Like I said, we're a government agency, so everything's a little bit laborsome, but once it's done, it's really easy to get services done. So first we start with application, then the counselor determines a student eligible, then we develop a plan, and then after a plan's developed, we place them in employment, and once they're stable, we close out the case. And I'm going to talk a little bit in more details about those processes. So for the application to services, we have an intake packet, and it's about, we just shortened it. It used to be 10 pages. It's now about 6. And it's really just getting the basic information about them, but it's really a process. So they fill out the application, and then they meet with one of our counselors and do an intake interview. And that's where we kind of talk about the commitments both ways, what we would do for the students, and then what they're expected to do in our services. And then once we both agree that they're ready for the process, we would open their case. I added just pictures of some of the paperwork, just because to emphasize it's a little bit more of a process than our youth services, which is a one-page application. And yes, you guys can absolutely have a copy of this presentation. It should be on the Padlet, which I believe you'll all have access to. To be eligible for our adult services, it's pretty much the same as our youth program, but we do have to go through the eligibility process. So instead of just having a teacher sign off saying a student has a disability, we have to gather medical records showing that. If they're on Social Security, they're automatically eligible for our program. And of course, we don't deny services based on race, sex, color, creed, home of national origin, disabling condition, or veteran status. And it's really just an individualized program. We hardly ever make someone ineligible. So just know it'll take more time, but you're still on the right path. So usually it can take up to 60 days to become eligible. If they're on Social Security, it's much quicker, it's 15 days. And sometimes if a student's maybe too severe, maybe they don't have a lot of work experience, maybe they've really struggled with their work experiences that they've done in school, we might put them in what's called a trial work experience. And that's one of the ways to kind of give them more time to explore and do evaluations. But typically with adult services, we just hit the ground running. We start with applying to jobs or providing training and really going for that. So this doesn't really apply, but just so you guys know, lots of states have what's called order of selection. And that's when there's not enough funds, so only the most severe students or adults get served. And in Idaho, we're not in order of selection. So whether it's really minor ADHD, all the way up through severe cerebral palsy, we have funds available to help adults. So for planning, we identify an appropriate vocational goal, and we base it on their education, their needs, their interests, specific limitations related to disability. And then we identify services that can help remedy those things. And again, all the services are very specific and individualized. So just because we pay for college for one student doesn't mean that it'll be the ideal fit for another student. Or just because one student needs job coaching doesn't mean another student will. So really just working through that process and developing a plan together. These are some examples of adult services. So we do job exploration, which we also do with our youth. We do some assessments to kind of determine placements. If students or adults don't have a diagnosis, we can pay for diagnostic assessments. We also do support services. So we do some case management and kind of connecting students and adults to community resources. We also do job-related services, including job shadows, job search, job placement. We also do some job readiness activities. So it could be resume building, it could be interview prep. Hopefully, students sign up for a pre-case with us, so they've already worked on some of these skills. But even if you're a senior, you're going out into the world and you didn't access our youth services, we still can build those skills for adults. We also, like I said earlier, provide disability-related supports, whether it's counseling, OT, PT, med management, medication, anything that someone would need to be successfully independent on a job. And then we also help with assistive tech. So we work with the Idaho Assistive Technology Project, and we can pay for evaluations with them. They'll recommend tech for us, and then we can help with paying for that tech. So really a lot of services and quite kind of a broad range. So closing out a case, once we've provided college training, or if someone went straight into work, we make sure that they have everything that they need. And once they feel like they don't need any supports, we count down another 90 days, and then we can close out their case successfully. Some reasons we usually close cases unsuccessfully: if students kind of drop off the map, lack of contact, failure to make adequate plan progress, which isn't a common one, and then also refusal for further services. So all of our services are completely voluntary, and we do a lot of informed choice. So we're never going to force your kids to do something if they don't want to do it. And it's really about kind of helping them become good self-advocates about whether or not they actually want our services. So if you want to learn more about our services, here's my contact email. And also you can reach out to my counterpartners, Molly and Sydney. There are a lot more boots on the ground. They're in all of your guys' schools, at least in Boise, in West Ada, Erin, Herland, and Marcy Howells are in your schools. But again, you can reach out to me and I can connect you with the right counselor depending on what school you're working with. And that is everything.